Hi, and welcome to our session on using OpenText Privacy Management to automate the rights requests process and mitigate risk. We're on here today with my colleague Andy Teichholz, who is our industry strategist for compliance and legal. And I am Gino Vicari. I'm the solution expert, also specializing in everything related to OpenText Privacy Management and OpenText compliance. Before I get going with I'm going to say the more practical and pragmatic side of things, I would like to hand it over to Andy, who will give you a little bit of an overview of what this means, what it is to respond to rights requests.
All right, thank you so much, Gino, and welcome everybody to our Turbo Talk today. As Gino was saying, before Gino decides to talk a little bit more about the technology to automate and respond to rights requests, I wanted to provide just a bit of more context around data privacy, consumer data privacy rights, and the right of access itself, as well as why management and automation of this process is so critical to reduce costs and mitigate risk. Gino, if you can go to the next slide. So, as background, recently data privacy regulations, whether we're talking about the GDPR, the CCPA, or even the LGPD, have forced businesses to adopt new information management strategies on how to collect, use, store personal data or personal information. And these regulations have also provided individuals, either statutorily defined as data subjects or consumers, with a right to know what is being collected about them, why the organization's in possession of the data, and to whom this information is disclosed to. And so if businesses don't comply, they can face significant regulatory penalties. Major infringements of the GDPR, for instance, can result in fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of a company's worldwide annual revenue from the previous year, whichever is higher. In California, under the CCPA, statutory penalties can range from $2,500 to $7,500 per individual violation, and that violation will include noncompliance with consumer requests. If you look at the slide here, I list out some of the core data privacy principles and requirements, and most of them have very similar requirements. And some of the key ones include a right to access and disclosure, which is what we're going to focus most closely on today, which is really the right to know what is being processed, the purposes for which one is processing information, and the ability to access that data. There's a right to rectification, which is really the ability to correct inaccurate information. A right to erasure under the GDPR. This is often known as the right to be forgotten, which is the ability to delete private information that's being collected about you. The right of data portability, which allows individuals to move, copy, transfer personal data easily from one IT environment to another in a safe and secure way without affecting its usability. But like I said just recently, when you're presenting the biggest challenge for all of us today, and what we're seeing more and more with a lot of the companies that speak to us, is the ability to respond and comply to information access or subject access requests. Really a process that starts from an intake period through the fulfillment of that request. And some key obligations to comply with these requests include, verification of the request, identification of what is needed, the actual completion of the request itself, and then very importantly is doing so within the prescribed timelines based on the regulation. So if you look at the slide, if you look at the GDPR, you have 1 month, and that's not including any extensions you might get. And in the in the CCPA, 45 days, and under the LGPD, you're talking about a 15-day time frame. So very tight, very stringent demands. Gino, if you could jump to the next slide. So before I wrap it up, I just want to spend a few more minutes talking about organizational costs and burdens associated with responding to access requests. That is in addition to statutory or regulatory penalties. So if you look at this chart here, according to Gartner, organizations are spending on average a little over $1,400 US per subject access request. And it takes about at least a full working week to respond to each of them. The challenge, and Gartner cites this as well, is attributed a lot to the lack of automation. Another key point is that individuals are making more and more requests, and it's becoming difficult to keep up. So if a company, let's say, is processing an upward of 100 or 200 requests per million consumer records, they could be spending an upward of 140 to just under $300,000 per million consumer requests if they're not automating this process. So we can see that this is a huge financial burden for businesses today. And finally, many departments are leading these efforts to support the request, but we're also finding that this is becoming a big burden on legal in particular. If you look at what I have here on the right side, again from Gartner, legal departments are now leading this support effort and experiencing firsthand these challenges. They're looking to deploy technology to alleviate operational and financial burdens on their department and across the organizations. And Gartner is reinforcing this opinion by predicting that 2023, there's going to be about 150% increase in internal legal counsel investment in dedicated solutions to handle these types of requests. So again, no matter who, regardless of the department ownership, deployment of these automation and workflow tools to reduce these costs and compliance concerns is top of mind in organizations. So now that I've provided you with a bit of context, I want to turn this back over to Gino so he can help show you how OpenText can automate this activity. Gino?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So first, let's have a quick look, really in a nutshell, at the challenges you might come across, because responding to an information access request or a subject access request, first means it needs to be valid. As Andy already said, you need to verify that it's a valid request. It needs to be complete. Make sure you don't forget anything, accurate, in time, so within the deadline, tracked and auditable, so you can really show what you've done, and then preferably, obviously, at a minimal overhead and cost. On top of this, these challenges already, you can also see that it's quite difficult to identify certain content and certain information because it's not always easy to collect all relevant information. Whether it sits on any kind of computer system server or on a departmental drive or in some SharePoint site, how do you collect all that information? Also, not all information is digital, so what do you do with paper? What about making sure you don't share what you're not supposed to share? So redacting information that you're not supposed to share inside of the documents you're sharing. And then finally, how do you make sure that you securely share it? Because, for example, email is not necessarily considered a safe way of sharing information back to the requester. Well, how do you tackle this? I always say automate, 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 but we got some details there. So it's process automation with digitization, file discovery and collection, automated redactions, and secure sharing. So we took some demo screenshots to guide you through our solution stack and how we actually integrate all of that with our privacy management solution. And as a first example, let's talk about the benefits of process automation. For example, imagine somebody writes you an email. So, dear madam or sir, can you please share with me the personal data that you hold about me, which is something I'm entitled to in context of the current privacy regulation. Immediately when the person sends an email, they get one back saying like, yes, okay, fine, but we have correctly received your request. Could you please prove that you say who you are by sending us a copy of your ID card or your driver's license or something like that? So the system already does an automated request for a proof of ID. Once that comes in, you immediately get a task in the, I'm going to call it the knowledge worker or the privacy expert, to verify the proof of ID, where in the system, what you see here is our system, your privacy management solution. You click on the task and you can then look at the email that came in and was automatically put in the system. And you can even look at the driver's license. For example, this would be a UK driver's license. Once you've done that, you can then validate and say, okay, it's a valid proof of ID, just a button that says valid, invalid, and you move to the next stage. I talked about not everything is digital. Well, how do you digitize paper? Well, in this tool, you could very simply just get a scan documents task, which you can see here. It's on the orange task that says scan documents. You click on it. You get access to our scanning tool where you have a link in the task, and then you basically scan all the documents. You put them on, on the scanning machine or on a multifunctional, or just it comes in via any capture tool, and the system helps you, organize it, discover the documents from the scanning, and even be able to classify them. Is it what kind of document is it? So you also even enrich it with metadata before sharing it out. And then ultimately you confirm that when you reviewed it, that's indeed that the scanning was successful and that it's indeed these type of documents and that they are relevant. So they come back into the system as scanned documents, in this case, PDFs. Then after you've done the scanning, there's another one. I talked about those, file shares or those share points or there are locations where it's a little bit tricky to find the documents, this unstructured information. How do you find that? Well, there you can find the documents or the information using file discovery or crawling tools that will actually crawl the systems to find the personal data and discover the documents that contain the relevant personal data. So in this context, for example, it found, what you can see here, 7 responsive or 7 relevant documents for the request. Our data subject, a lady called Scarlett Iris, actually had 7 documents across systems, and you found those by actually doing some pattern matching and some literal search on the personal data to find the documents. The documents that are responsive, you can see it with the yellow highlights here. And you can go through them to validate that they're indeed about the personal data containing personally identifiable information. But you can also maybe sometimes have documents that are irrelevant, so you can select them and still remove them as not being relevant to the response. And then finally, when you've done all the overview, you can actually complete the task and move to the next step. The next step, remember I said, you need to redact things that you're not supposed to share. Well, what about automated redaction? What if you had some artificial intelligence helping you automatically redact the documents before you share them out? That's really valuable because it will really reduce your work time, your effort. And what you see here is actually a verify redactions task. Rather than redact, it says verify redactions, where you can see that all the documents are in PDF. They have been automatically redacted. You might not be able to read, it might be small, but they're in gray overlays. The redactions are on top of the text. You can still read the text to validate that it's proper redaction. For example, here's another document, maybe with some gray overlay, but also where you would want to, and you can see this, you have those green overlays. That's actually manual redaction. So you can see the difference between a machine redaction and then somebody correcting the machine by adding some green or manual redactions. The same applies to the other scanned documents, and for example, also on any document that was collected via the discovery tool. So it's completely the same, whether it's scanned documents or collected via discovery or even manually collected for that matter. And then lastly, when you're at the end of all of this, how do you ensure securing it back? Well, securely sharing it back, I apologize. You securely share it back by not doing a lot if you have it correctly configured, because you have the email address, you have all the information already collected inside of the system. And as you can see, it went from, verification stage completely through response or responded state by sharing automatically all the information you've collected through the email back, but not normally email, but securely. And by that, I mean you get a link to our secure content management system in the cloud called OpenText Core Share, and a link to access it with a password to access it. So you have the password as well. This password could be also provided through another means than an email, like via text or something. And then you can log in, click download, get the file, and ultimately have all the collected documents. Some might be some structured information that you collected from the HR system and that was generated inside a report, and the other ones would then be the documents, for example, that I've showed you how you could scan them and how you could actually redact them out. Now the redactions have now been burned in, so they're no longer overlay. They're actually truly, wiped out redactions. You can't, reverse engineer the redaction with the reason for redacting. Here it says third party, but you can define whatever the reason for redaction is on top. So what did we see? Well, we saw the example of how you could respond to information access requests. The request was valid because you had the verification moment. You made sure it was complete. You went in all the data sources, did your due diligence in finding responsive document. It was accurate. It was redacted for what you were not supposed to share. Of course, it's in time because you automated it. It's fully tracked and auditable because everything that goes in the system is actually considered a record of such a response. And then indeed with as minimal overhead and cost as possible. So this brings us to the end of our presentation, our quick a little demo on subject rights requests and the response process. Thank you so much for your attention. And maybe, Andy, there's any questions in the chat? Otherwise, is there anything, any question?
Gino, I don't see any questions. I was just going to say, let's just give maybe, in terms of delays or a minute or two, just to see if anyone has anything to add in the question view. And if we don't see that, then we can close out. While we're waiting for questions, I just want to make a note that you should certainly feel free to visit us at our virtual industry booth. We are not putting on demos at that particular location, but we do have a feature to ask the expert. So if you have any questions related to any of the topics that we mentioned today, maybe you have a broader interest around data privacy or other sort of compliance or regulatory industry discussions, Gino and I have a wide range of expertise. So we can be available to answer your questions there. And if we're not available during the times that you arrive, there are other industry strategists that can direct your inquiries our way so we can answer down the road. But Gino, I don't see any questions coming in. So I think we can conclude this session.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. So thank you, everyone, and have a good conference further. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.